Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
It is summertime, and you know what I'm not going to be doing this summer? Going to a big major music festival. It's a funny thing. When I was younger, I was really into it, trying to go to tons of them. Often they were too expensive when I was younger. You know, it's just crazy to get into any of these like 3-day pass situations. But as I've gotten older, I'm just not as interested these days.
Old man sigh weighing in. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, music festivals, I think it's all about how you experience it, where it is, who's running it, what the lineup is like. But it is exceedingly expensive, and it's only more expensive the minute you set foot on the property of the festival, where you're, have to pay for your food and beverage for the whole 3 days. Usually music festivals are 3 days. I do have a little history of music festival folks in my life because my dad, he was in the movie Woodstock and actually attended Woodstock.
Crazy.
And I still have the tickets because by the time he got there, the fences had been trampled down. And so,
wow,
pretty cool.
That is super
he's in the
cool.
movie.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I don't mean to sound like too much of a curmudgeon. I actually really do enjoy it when I'm there. I just don't find myself like planning it that often. Lately, it's been a lot of fun to take my kids, right, to go to these things and just kind of experience it through their eyes because they're still young enough where they want to hang out with us, but not quite old enough where they're doing this on their own, although that's going to be happening pretty soon here. On that side, it's great. But the reason I bring up music festivals is because just this week, there was an announcement from Northern Nights, a music festival that's going to be taking place in July in the Humboldt-Mendocino border. What's really interesting about it is that they're going to have a pretty sizable cannabis activation. And it's not the first time we've seen this, and I want to talk about other examples of this, but this does seem pretty unique. Unique in the way that they're going to have on-site dispensaries located at stages in the press release for this 2022 edition. And they also called out a number of notable California brands that are pretty well recognizable, like Farmer and the Felon, Lagunitas, Hi-Fi Sessions, which we talked about just recently when we discussed beverages and session beverages, and Jetty Extracts, who we were talking about not too long ago because of Canopy and their kind of an investment into that brand. So pretty interesting to see and different than what we've seen in the past. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting that they called it out right away that they were going to be sponsored by cannabis. It feels right in terms of the fact that it's part of the Emerald Triangle right there on the banks of the Eel River. I've heard from many people that this festival is pretty cool. It's like more of a homegrown festival. And it's really interesting I was telling Sai as we were prepping for this discussion, I happened to meet up with this person named Duncan, who's based in San Francisco, and he owns 3 retail locations for cannabis in San Francisco with an equity applicant co-founder. And he was he randomly said, hey, have you heard of the Northern Nights Music Festival? It actually happens basically on my property. And I saw it says it's technically the Cook County Fairgrounds, but I know it also gets onto his land. And it sounds like a pretty cool event. And we were talking about the merits of vending either alcohol or cannabis at these events and how much money you make. And he was sharing with me that it's not a very lucrative. In fact, you typically actually don't make money or maybe even lose money. But I think what it is something that has been a theme that we've been talking about here at the High Rise is activations, experiences that you can tie brands into. And so I think it was interesting. You called out very specifically Northern California focused brands, including Lagunitas, which has the crossover to Bev Elk and cannabis. So for those who don't know, Lagunitas is a craft brewer in I think it's Petaluma, where they were based out of. And they very early on kind of partnered up with Absolute Extracts, which is adjacent to them in Santa Rosa, and started doing Hi-Fi hops. And I thought it was really smart because hops and cannabis are both very terpene rich. And when you see hops and you smell hops and you taste hops, they taste very much like cannabis. So there's a lot of synergies there, for lack of a better word. But I thought this was a pretty interesting approach and pretty exciting to see a group leading with talking about this.
Totally, totally. And, contrast that with grasslands, which I think we've talked about before, happening at outside lands. I mean, we've certainly covered it in other high rises, some poolside sessions, and it's a little bit of a different model. And you've been there, right? You've been to grasslands. Can you kind of explain what that experience was like when you were there?
Yeah. And actually, it's pretty cool. We're going to have a guest on who's the founder of Grasslands soon, but it's part of the Outside Lands Music Festival. And Outside Lands Music Festival has these different activations, again, within the festival where it's definitely the music is the draw. I've seen a lot of good music at Outside Lands. Last year, I would say a highlight was Krungbin. That was amazing. Highly recommend seeing that band live, and multiple others. But they have Winelands, which is neat because, again, it dovetails into Northern California wine brands that are local, not necessarily nationally distributed. So they have a presence there. There's, other culinary lands, and then Grasslands, which is its own kind of sequestered aspect of the festival, but it's in this really cool location overlooking the whole festival. And I'm very curious to hear how Northern Nights is going to navigate this, because the way that Grasslands has been able to actually pull off retailing cannabis at an event is to have a sectioned off space where you can't consume alcohol and you can't bring alcohol in. Or at least that was my experience when I was there last year and the years before. And that's because of the state regulations, which we all know these regulations vary state to state. And so there was a lot of security and a lot of track and trace going on up in that section. And as for folks who don't know, Dustin who from Embark was on the podcast, and he was actually the group that was running that. And I remember they were pulling all-nighters, making sure that they were running everything through compliance. And also California sent people from the control board to oversee things, to check in throughout the weekend, to make sure that there wasn't anything going out the back of the festival. So it was very well regulated, well run. But I'm very curious the way that they set this up from Northern Nights. I think they said that they were going to have brand activations at each stage. Was that what you saw too, Sai?
Yeah, it was something like that, like being able to dispense, which is retail cannabis at each stage. So it might be a little different than Grasslands.
Yeah, it is in the very rural aspect of Northern California up there, and that is inherently very different than Outside Lands, which happens right in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park. So it could be just kind of a different way that things are handled up there.
Yeah, I think the grasslands, not having gone, it does sound pretty interesting, like the way that brands can do activation. It kind of reminds me of Hall of Flowers. And I think, Hall of Flowers, which is, in Santa Rosa or in Palm Springs, and it's an industry event where, brands are doing activations, right? Brands have their booth, they have their products, they talk about their products. And you can actually purchase their products through a singular dispensary. A licensed dispensary is running all the products, but you get them at, a nice discount. And it gives you an opportunity to really try a lot of things, right? And that's what's so exciting, because there's all these brands out there, but it can be tough at most conferences to really understand, what the product is, right? They have their packaging and they might have their marketing and their language around what these products are, but to actually, interact with the products is challenging because of limitations. And so, that's at an industry level, and people from the industry will go to this Hall of Flowers event to really understand, what products should I carry, which brands should I bring out of the California market and license in other, emerging markets and so on. But why I bring it up is because I think about Grasslands and I think about consumer adoption, and we talk about the challenges of marketing in cannabis and how hard it can be to get in front of consumers and to differentiate your brand. And, a lot of people argue, there are no brands in cannabis, in the sense of like brand loyalty, brand retention, brand awareness for a majority of consumers out there. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with marketing limitations. You can't really get in front of the consumer very easily. It can be quite challenging. And so add something like Grasslands and maybe something like Northern Nights coming up here, it does seem like a great platform for consumers to go and try the brands, like to learn more about them and to actually purchase them and experience them, right? Whatever that may be. And so it just seems like a great vehicle for that, because you're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of people, in front of your brand. Where else can you do that, right? Hall of Flowers is great, but it's an industry event, and they're not pulling consumers through there. And, maybe there's a need for something like that, right? But when you have music and you have that festival, and that's like a big draw already, and it's bringing a lot of people in, and then you have your brands there, it's a great combination. And so it's good to see. And I know Grasslands has been doing it for a number of years, and it's going to be great to do an upcoming interview to learn more about that. But I would love to see, this go beyond California, right? Go into other markets. There are festivals in other markets, right? And there are festivals in markets that have legal cannabis. Like I'm based in Seattle, and there's a great festival called the Thing Festival that's coming up in August. And they had the first one right before the pandemic, and it was fantastic. But, no cannabis, right? No cannabis activation in Washington State's a legal state, right? So just missed opportunity there. I don't know how we make this happen, if it's the festival promoters are doing it, and that's the driver, or the industry needs to be the driver, or some combination of that. But I do feel like it's a great platform to just get consumer awareness, and frankly underutilized.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's nice for people to have options other than alcohol when they're attending these 3-day festivals. I mean, let's face it, like, for example, on a Saturday at Outside Lands, if you're running around, it usually is warm, at least for a part of the day before the fog rolls in again. But like that's drinking alcohol that whole time is dehydrating. And so having alternatives of ways to kind of augment your experience or unwind is a really nice thing to have available for consumers. And so I think it's really cool. Not to mention the fact that, I mean, people don't drive that much here in San Francisco, but it's nice to not have people just totally pounding alcohol and then getting in a car, leaving a festival or whatever it is. So, or in my case, riding a bike through San Francisco. But I do think it's interesting. And I'm thinking about, you're raising some great points about other markets. And one of the things we're seeing progress in is in Las Vegas with the consumption lounges, because this is the big issue for cannabis, right? Or there are many big issues for cannabis. A issue for cannabis is that in general, most people can only consume it within their home or their own private property, right? But consumption lounges create the space outside of the home where you can do this, and you can do it more in a normalized environment, kind of like going to a bar or to a restaurant or a cafe. And for example, there's Electric Daisy Carnival in Las Vegas. And so I think there's been some work around potentially incorporating cannabis into events around that. And I think it's a really interesting movement we could see. I'm guessing it goes from west to east a little bit, as a
Sure.
little bit more progressive states might actually take this on. But it would be really fun to see this at the things that I used to go to and when I was like living in Brooklyn. And there's really fun music events that would pop up on the waterfront in Williamsburg or Greenpoint, and great DJ events. And if we can just create a framework around how to do this, and then it's repeatable, I think we can make some progress. And to your point, I am curious when we do talk with the future guest to hear about how he actually had to do a lot of heavy lifting to get this to this point as a festival organizer. So I think, another theme we talk about here is that the changes that we see will have to come from private industry. And I think these organizations are the ones who will be driving it forward.
Funny you talk about having a model that works, and then you can take that, elsewhere. It's almost like legalization, right? At the state level. It's like you think you could use one model and you could go out to each different market and learn from it and accelerate adoption, but it seems to take a little longer. So hopefully we can see more festivals adopting this type of model faster than we see states coming online. So are you going to head to Northern Nights? You're down in Northern California. Is it pretty far for you?
It's a couple hours in the car. I'm thinking about it because it is some electronic music. There are some DJs. I was checking it out after I saw the lineup. So it could be pretty interesting. I am not a wilderness gal, and I'm not a sleepover at a festival gal. So there is word that I could have some hot water available to me via this lovely person, Duncan, that I met. And so I may consider it, but it is kind of it's a little bit of a stretch for me. I'm just, if you put me on a boat, then we're talking, but I don't do the woods so well.
Yeah.
Would you go if you were based in Northern California?
I think I might. It'd be great to go and just kind of check it out. Given it's new and just a new model, to see like what this would look like and could this be reproduced. But yeah, these days I'm a fan of hot water as well. So we'll see.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.